Good morning, Miguel. How are you?
Good morning, Jenny White.
Guess what we're fighting with again today?
Well, I'm sure it's Rumble on this Thursday, November 14th emergency broadcast. I'll call it. We need to have some emergency music.
Now suddenly we've decided to come on.
Some air raid sirens or something for the.
How's that?
Yeah, you could double for a siren.
Can I? Okay. All right. Well, so we're actually working on Rumble.
All right, good.
I know. I'm like super happy. Okay. Good morning. We're working. I'm so excited. Yes. So kind of this is all my fault, and I'm sorry for dragging you into it, Michael, but I totally forgot to book our friend V1SUT for this month.
Well, and who has some of the most cutting edge information out there but Mary at V1SUT?
That's exactly correct. And so I was like, oh no, I accidentally forgot to book V1SUT. So sorry about that, everybody. I kind of feel bad about that. And I've already apologized to, good morning, Amber. So glad you're with us this morning. I've totally apologized to our friend Mary because I was like, guess what I did? I was so sorry. So we'll be much better at that. And we won't have an emergency one next week because isn't next week already Thanksgiving? No, next week's the week before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we'll be good for next week. So anything new with you today?
Nothing new, just anticipating looking into who all these picks are going to be for the forward going administration here. I'll be highly interested to see all these financial picks and weigh in on good or bad guys. Trump's kind of gone away from the three previous guys that I mentioned, which thank God, because those guys are embedded deep state.
See, but I think he put that out that was before the election, and he put that out.
Yeah, it was.
I think that was one of those infamous and dreaded Trump's waving this hand while the other hand does something different over here.
Could have been.
So I tend to think that's what that was because I was with you. I was like, and that's gross. So what are we doing here? So I think, but then he's done a couple of boneheaded ones like the Neem. What's her name? Neem. Secretary of Homeland Security, Christy Neem. Is it Christy? I don't know. I'm having like some kind of weird thing. Oops, bring out the focus. Who's supposed to be, was she South Dakota?
Oh, the governor. I can't think of her name. Christy Noem.
Yeah, Christy Noem. And thank you, Dana. Christy. Yes. And for Department of Homeland Security. And she has we'll go into that another time, but we're going to bring on our friend Mary with V1SUT because we've got all kinds of things to talk about.
The real issues that matter here.
That's correct. And again, who's doing that? I'm bringing her on. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning. Good to be with you both, as always.
Yes. And so publicly, sorry, forgot about this month. But thank you for doing our special.
That's okay. If a scheduling issue is your idea of an emergency, you have a pretty good life.
Well, who knows?
No, looking forward to talking about this. As you both know, the past year, honestly, for Visit on that publication has been dedicated in pretty big part to doggedly following two different situations in two different communities with reported sexual abuse of students in their public education system.
So can I plug you just a little bit? Is there anybody in the state talking about this but you?
Not at that level. And so in a way, this past year was an experiment to see if you could give the victims in these situations who are trying so desperately to report and meeting so much resistance a voice, if you can force feed the system truth, can you bring some justice? That was the whole exercise. And we're a year into it. So The first article about Wetumpka, Oklahoma, happened in October of last year. That's where we really got started. So that was the situation that's still unfolding of a gentleman named Brent McGee, who had been sexually molesting boys for over 30 years. His wife was the superintendent, and he had a lot of power in the community. Not only was he coach, he was athletic director, he owned a Dairy Queen, he was the mayor, he was on the city council for years. Just a really powerless population. So when Casey Yoakum, who was on the program with me the last time we were on, along with Justin Coate, two really brave survivors who are helping to bust this open. That was the first one. And the second one was our Harmful Coaches series, which started with some girls who attended Little Axe High School. And the group of coaches, it was just an extreme culture of sexual abuse of high school girls. Yeah. And those coaches, we followed them as they spread out. They hopped to other districts. We started to look into the patterns that were there. And now the more you dig and the more you investigate, the higher into the ranks of public education will you find yourself. And that's where we are. We are in a situation now where the superintendent of Shawnee Schools, who was a former coach of Little Axe, has now been directly accused of grooming girls into sexual relationships. We are actually now on the third of the 7 districts that he has served in over 24 years, where we have multiple victims in all 3 of those.
Third of 7.
Yes, he served in 7 different districts over a 24-year period, and we have victims, multiple victims from each of these districts who have come forward in now 3 different districts. One was Little Axe, where he started, and then Boone Apache is where he went after some accusations at Little Axe, and then he went to Edmond and Luther and Olive and Cleveland. And we have some girls from Luther now who are coming forward to the Oklahoma State Department of Education and are part of the investigation.
Oh, for peace.
Well, Mary, real quick, do you think this is this more? Is this at a higher level or happening more in Oklahoma rather than the whole country? Do you know that at all? Or is it more of a systemic problem just specifically here in our education system? Or what do you think?
Well, from what I have learned, I would say both to the answer to that question. It is a nationwide problem. We're seeing more of it in our schools, but it is particularly pronounced in Oklahoma. These prolific pedophiles who've been allowed to have reign and have access to children. And I think from what I've learned, there are some stopgaps that have not been put in place in Oklahoma. And we have some legislation that has been monkeyed with, honestly, by higher education to cover up some of this. So in places like Texas, in 2017, Texas put a pass the trash law in place. So if you're a principal or a superintendent and there's an accusation of child abuse and you did not both of you report it to the authorities, you've committed a crime and you will be prosecuted. That's what their state law says. We have no such law. There's no accountability in the system. And I think that's got a great deal to do with it. And then I think the other thing is that our statutes of limitations for child sex crimes, and that's in schools and that's out of schools, were honestly monkeyed with in the same year, in 2017. They made it look like they fixed the problem and they changed the laws. It had been sort of kicked the can down the road. It was, you had to report within 5 years, which is insane in child sex abuse, that a child would have to report within 5 years of abuse. Then it went to 7 years, then it went to 12 years. And in 2017, they said, okay, we're going to solve this problem. Up until the age of 45, you can report, but they didn't make it retroactive. So anybody prior to 2017 cannot go after their perpetrator. And typically people don't report this until well into adulthood. So they didn't really help anyone. And then the other thing that they did in that 2017 legislation that just gives you anger is that the forces that be stepped in while they were trying to pass this good law protecting kids and finessed it. And on the civil part of the legislation, they added the caveat that if it involves an institution, if you're going to go after, say, a school district for failing to protect from a prolific pedophile, gross neglect here, you have to do it within 2 years of those acts happening. And then
Yeah.
they made it could be from the age of majority. So from the time you turn 18, you have 2 years. You can't turn 20 and still go after a school for knowingly letting this go on. So the answer to your question is, I think Oklahoma's got big problems compared to a lot of other states.
So then I'm going to follow Michael's question up by asking this. Do you have some legislators with whom you visited that you believe can run this legislation? Because, we're coming up against a hard stop here in just a little bit. December 6th, I think something like that is the day that they have to have titles for legislation. Have you dealt with any legislators who are willing to run these couple of things that you've talked about before on this show and get them wrapped up for next session?
Are you asking Michael? Or are you asking
No,
me?
you.
Oh, I thought you were asking Michael.
No,
No, I do not know of. I know some great grassroots champions, and also Sherry Conley have formed the Broken Trust organization. And one of their focuses, I know, is going to be to push for that needed legislation. We'll see how that goes. It's a huge, huge need. I know of no one who has that draft in the box right now as far as fixing this.
So Dr. Pelham's asking you, did you follow that rabbit hole on the 2017 legislature? Were the common denominators and motivations to instill those mistakes?
Yes, actually. And we'll get into some of it later, but I just want to answer your question directly so that we don't forget it. Yes, in that 2017 legislation, it was not originally drafted that way. It was originally drafted that there were no restrictions, and then it got watered down, and one of the senators behind it is Senator Adam Pugh. And after that was inserted in the civil legislation, where you only had 2 years as a child who was abused within public school to sue a district, he became the chairman of the ed committee. So
Wow.
there you go.
Wow.
Okay, so one other thing, because this is a really important one, I think, Steph, the invisible, we can see your little thing now there, Steph. What if police will not investigate? Because that's a really good question. But what do you do then? What if because so many of these people have gone, and you've talked to us about this before. They go and the police says, or the DA says, and nobody gets anything done on it. What about that?
That is very true. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the system, because it truly is a system. It's a multi-part system that is protecting these predators within public education. I can tell you, we're going to talk a bit about Shawnee, because we're talking about this Shawnee superintendent who's currently on administrative leave. There's all kind of tactics going on to protect him, because he's very connected to the unions as well. He has functions within the education unions. But in Shawnee, they experienced exactly that. I'll give you the 30-second version. When Coach Ron Arthur, the basketball coach, was accused of abusing boys for years, 15 plus years, and it was covered up by at least 3 administrators, according to the court documents. There was a refusal in rural corruption in these smaller places to investigate it for years. There was a refusal after it was investigated to prosecute it. It actually took Senator Shane Jett, who is our state senator that represents that area out in Shawnee, to step forward, ask for a grand jury. He got then Attorney General John O'Connor involved. It actually ended up sending the case outside of the district and down to Cleveland County for a bit. The DA there finally stepped down because it was obvious that there was a protectionism going on here. That took a different DA. So the fight is real, exactly what you're saying. And I know this from victims, that they do report a lot of the times and nothing happens. Another thing, some confusion about law enforcement that's happening to families, is they go to the school when these things are found out, when they find out something's happened to their child. And I think that's a pretty natural reaction, to go to the school, go to the administration. They trust these people. And because there's a school resource officer involved, they think that they've reported to law enforcement, and then they find out years later. I mean, this is a really good, this is a very attractive path for families. Imagine, if you will, that your child has been sexually abused. you go to the school, the last thing you want to do to your traumatized child is to have this to be a huge and public event.
Right.
And so they go to the school, there's a school resource officer involved, they're going to do an investigation. I think a lot of parents don't understand what that means.
Yeah.
The school's very silently talking about a Title IX investigation internally and no law enforcement, but school resource officers work for school districts.
Yeah.
When they're on the clock and they're in the school, they're not working for that agency and they have no obligation. Well, actually, they do under the law if they know it's crime, but they are reporting.
Well, but it's not the same police powers. I think that's all you meant to say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's very real. That was a good comment. There are more roadblocks to victims than we can count in this multi-layered system.
You know, and Dana makes a really great case.
Yeah.
Ashley or makes a really great comment. Ashley Rowland's case is a great example. I mean, she did everything right. And then, you know, look where we are on that.
Yes. And for those who don't know, Ashley Rowland, in the Little X case that we've been following for almost a year now, she was sort of the hero whistleblower. She came forward and said, I was drugged and raped by this coach. And she gathered statements from all her other classmates, and she went on a tear trying to get the Oklahoma State Department of Education, then under Joy Hoffmeister, to do anything. And they did. Her mother worked for the district at the time of the crime. She worked directly for the superintendent. She reported that. They assumed something would be done and didn't find out until years later that absolutely nothing had been done. He'd hopped from district to district to district collecting victims. So, okay.
And our friend Ashley says, thank you, Mary, for all you are doing. Survivors would not have a voice like this if it were not for you. And that, again, it's true. I'll say it again. Who else is talking about this but you? I just don't see. I mean, we're so grateful to you. So tell us what you got for today, because I mean, we got to hear this stuff.
All right. How do I go to my slides, Michael? Michael is my technical.
You want your slide up?
There we go. Excellent. Excellent. So as I said, as we've worked through this past year and committed to staying on this until we really saw justice, and we've worked higher and higher into the rungs of public education on this protectionism of predators. Some just huge questions have come up. And through observation and through all of this research, I'm convinced they're protecting these predators systematically. And why are they also attacking everyone who's trying to remove the predators? We're seeing that. We're going to talk a lot about that today. Who's behind this and why? These are really big questions. So I'm going to snap straight to some conclusions. And I told them I'm being a little sassy today, but this is not emotion. This
sassy for the win, Mary.
This is from empirical observation over this last year, that those at the top of this pyramid, they like Oklahoma's grossly failing and unsafe public school system just as it is. And we're going to talk about who the players are in this and break down who's really making this happen. They made it unsafe, but it definitely works for them, both financially and psychologically. We're going to talk about that. They create and they fund politicians, and they use unethical tactics to protect this system that is protecting predators. And they dress in business attire. They say the right words publicly. They give themselves awards. They induct one another into this thing called the Oklahoma Educators Hall of Fame, while kids increasingly fail and get hurt. So this slide summarizes what I have found in a year's worth of research. I know it's not cheery, it's a bit depressing, but I think it's very realistic, and we'll talk about why. Our most recent article is just a living example of everything that I just said. They like it that way, and they're going to keep it. But before we go into that article, I want to talk about this picture. This is the hallway at the Oklahoma State Department of Education. This is the hallway that the media walks down when they go to board meetings. This is where all the important people go to have their important meetings. And did you ever have an experience where something that happened in the past, you're thinking about now, because it's much bigger than what you thought it was when you first experienced it? It's much more prophetic. Well, this hallway is that experience for me. Because in January, maybe early February, the very first month of this new administration at the Oklahoma State Department of Education, under pretty much a brand new state school board of education, and under Ryan Walters taking office in January of 2023. In the first month, he did something that I thought was reactionary and picking a fight at the time. I'm going to be honest. I didn't write about it, but I noted it in my mind as, wow, that's a funny fight to take on as your first fight. What he did was he removed all of the pictures in this hallway that were the inductees into the Oklahoma Education Hall of Fame. And they went nuts. They went insane over this. They actually called in legislators who wrote a bill saying he had to return their portraits to the wall. And now that I'm looking back, what I know now, that was a brilliant move. Because in reality, those are the people who have run public education in the ditch and made it unsafe. And I know that now. Their accolades and their recognition are just a facade of accomplishment. But when you think about it, just looking at the period from 2014 to 2022, when Joy Hoffmeister was in office, one of the leading publications in education who ranks quality of education and ranks the states showed Oklahoma dropped from 17th to 49th.
Was that the new poll?
I believe it was.
Yeah.
17th to 49th in just 8 years.
Yeah.
Yet she was inducted into this Oklahoma Educators Hall of Fame. So I just want to give some people context about this. And this isn't about Ryan Walters. I want to put him aside. This was just an act that he did that was very telling to me, because this system's been in place fighting against us long before he came to town.
Oh, yeah.
And I want people to understand the parts of that system, because when he leaves town, they will still be doing this to our kids.
Yes.
Okay. I want to switch over to that article, Michael. Do I just do that by?
No, I'll do it.
You're the best. So let's dig into this article, and you all stop me, because I'm going to tell you, this is complicated. We are connecting a lot of dots, and people don't typically think of public education as highly political. I'm going to tell you, I believe it's the most highly political part of politics in Oklahoma.
I absolutely agree. And it has been since, in Oklahoma anyway, since outcomes-based education. So that was Sandy Garrett.
Interesting. So we've moved on from our Harmful Coaches series. Now that we have this superintendent who has been directly accused by multiple, now women, of engaging them in sexual relationships. I myself have interviewed many of them. Some of them obviously were not prepared to go public with their accusations, but were willing to talk to the OSDE investigators and add their stories to this investigation. The pattern is very much the same among these young women, that they were groomed into sexual relationships. They were from different districts. They didn't know each other. Even ones that were in the same district thought that they were the only one. The pattern is also that they truly believed that they were loved and that they were going to marry him.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
So when you see consistent patterns through years and through districts, it adds a lot of credibility to these accusations. So I just want you to know who we're talking about, and I want to go down here. So when this superintendent, his name is Dr. Aaron Esbolt, is accused of these things, you also need to know that he is engaged very actively with the education unions. He serves on COSA, that's the school administrator who's here in Oklahoma. He serves on the executive committee. He also is one of only 2 representatives to their national body, which is the School Superintendents Association. So this person is extremely connected. And he's being very well protected by those entities. So the union lawyers and the state attorney general have used 2 different 11th hour stunts to disrupt back-to-back state board meetings. And let me give you a little context first, because you need to understand that a group of legislators over the past several months have caused a ruckus about wanting to be in the executive session portions of the State Board of Education meetings. So that's when they go behind closed doors to discuss a matter that can't be talked about publicly, okay? The only thing that happens, for the most part, not the only, but the vast majority of what happens in there is talking about teacher misconduct. It's talking about either suspending or revoking teacher certificates for misconduct, sexual abuse, those kind of things. They have been on this for months. The AG jumped in with his opinion and said they must be allowed into these executive sessions. Sarah LePack, in one of the board meetings, really let them have it. It was an interesting verbalization, because you usually don't hear sort of a long speech from a board member during those board meetings. And she talked about that they weren't willing to sign any non-disclosures, that they talk about children who have been abused by name. They're talking about people who have been accused of crimes, and we don't want their information out there. So this is their chance to sit down and really talk about if these suspensions are needed. And the AG stepped in and said, you have to let him in there. So as a result, the board, under their legal counsel, not feeling comfortable with disclosing this information that any legislator can then go out and talk about publicly, said, we're not even going to go into executive session. So they spent a couple of months not being able to go into executive session. So these things that were happening as Dr. Espelt came up on the agenda to have his certification go under an emergency suspension were done in the open, which is really highly unusual.
Yeah.
So on the 1st in September at that meeting, just hours before the meeting, late in the afternoon, the night before, the attorneys from White and Weddle, that's the firm that is contracted with the OEA and with COSA, so the teachers union and the school board, the school administrators union is defending him.
Yeah.
And everyone is entitled to a defense. So we're not saying that that shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, but let's also point this out, though, Mary. Sorry to jump in, but let's also point this out and make sure that people understand that these are our tax dollars that go to fight taxpayers. Let's make sure we get that out there every time.
Yes. And I have a slide just for you later, Jenny. So they filed
I love those highlights.
They filed an injunction in Oklahoma County Court saying, stop, you cannot put him on emergency suspension. He'd already been put on paid administrative leave by the district. And this was sort of a move, because if he was suspended, his certificate was suspended, that would have ended his contract with the district and he wouldn't have been paid on suspension anymore. So he is making over $15,000 in total compensation a month. And that kept that flowing. So because of the injunction, the board had this out in the open conversation and talked about, well, he's on suspension from the district. He doesn't have access to kids. They balked because of this. Now, the injunction was never granted by the court, but they were talking about things like there are no criminal charges, and they were taking that into consideration. Well, this is far beyond the statutes that were set with the 2017 law that was not retroactive. These victims have no standing in criminal court. He could never be convicted in the state, by the state, for this. So that's a mute argument. They're basing not suspending him on things like he doesn't have any charges. Well, he can't have any charges under statutes of limitations. So there's this strange conversation, and they decide, no, they're going to leave it alone. They're going to take the long road, and they're going to pursue revoking his certificate, but they're not going to emergency suspend him, and he's going to continue to get paid. Okay. So that was interesting. Then in October, an additional victim had come forward between the September and the October meeting. And that prompted investigators to again put his name, Dr. Espelt, on the agenda for an emergency suspension. Hours before the October meeting, Attorney General Gentner Drummond stepped in and revoked permission for the board's attorney. So Kara Nicholas was serving as the State Board of Education's counsel. The OSDE has their own counsel. So Michael Beeson serves the agency as general counsel, and Kara Nicholas was hired with the approval of the Attorney General's office under something, it's a title, and it's called a 21I provision. So the Attorney General can approve them to use outside counsel. He had done that. Her contract was up. They petitioned the Attorney General's office in August to keep her as their counsel. And she had been counseling for them not to go into executive session with these legislators for some pretty valid reasons, right? The Attorney General had ordered, no, they have to go into these sessions. So now, as the superintendent's credentials are up again, in the 11th hour, the night before, the AG sends something saying, you can't use her. She's off the job. He gives them different long-term options for counsel for long-term ongoing. They can do in-house counsel. They can try to get another outside counsel under 20I provision, or they can just utilize the AG's attorney. And what they said is, if you want to still go ahead with your meeting in the morning, because this was the night before, we're going to send over Brad Clark, who was the Attorney General's general counsel, to do that, which sounds like a favor until you understand how incredibly conflicted Brad Clark is.
Yeah, so let's go back 1 second. So the Attorney General of Oklahoma got involved in this. So this is the head law enforcement agent in the state. So the Attorney General, who had already previously appointed or not appointed, but he did at least agree with the appointment by the OSDE of this one attorney, Kara, right?
Right.
So he agreed with that. But then right before Espelt gets his certification pulled, no, we're pulling her out and I'm giving you somebody else. How wackadoo is that?
So red flags all over.
How wackadoo is that? So the state's highest law enforcement agent gets involved in a state Department of Education meeting one time out of the blue over when it happens to be right around this.
Exactly. So that
I'm with
has
Steph.
red flags all over it.
Yeah.
But when you learn who Brad Clark is and what happened at this meeting, the red flags grow exponentially. And when you understand Brad Clark's direct conflict in the investigation into Espel and the other coaches of Little Axe, the conflict of interest explodes. It may be the most corrupt thing I've ever seen done by an Oklahoma politician live in front of pretty much every news camera in Oklahoma. And of course, so this is a post by Oklahomans for Public Education with a lot of little apples by Gunter Drutman's name, where they're celebrating this move. So they don't see any conflict here. This is working for them.
But let's make this point because people watching may not know Oklahomans for Public Education are a big leftist liberal organization that wants nothing more than to continue the status quo. And the status quo in Oklahoma about education is we want more money. We're going to bully you until you give us more money, and then we're not going to do crap for it.
That was pretty complete.
Yep.
I'll let that rest there. Okay. And as I talked about, the Brad Clark's conflicts of interest are huge, and we're going to get back to that. So set that on the shelf for just a minute. But I think one of the things that you have to understand is why they are so protective of Dr. Espelt. And it's more than just that he's connected to the unions, which he is. So I want to take a minute to start to walk through that and Espelt's connection to the OSDE and Joy
Wait, hold
Hoffmeister.
on 1 second. Hold on. Come on, we all have to take just a second and acknowledge this comment by Dana because it's so true.
It is.
It's all for the children. Right.
It definitely is.
Now, So sorry,
the-
I just have to
the-
ding them every time we can.
No, I want you to, you have great context. So the first time that we see Esbolt and Joy Hoffmeister connect, that we see it publicly, this isn't the first time they connected, but when she first comes into office, she gives him an award in 2015. So
Wow.
he's just become Cleveland Public Schools superintendent. And what we know is, I'll tell you a little bit about that later. So she gives him an award for financial excellence. Okay.
Financial excellence?
Yes, which is kind of odd. I can't really find a history of this award in the universe. I can't find much about anything except for it's on his bio that the OSDE gives him this award. And it's really kind of odd, I will tell you, because the award came at a time when Cleveland Public Schools was in financial straits. Just the next year, they passed a $12.2 million bond. There's media out there talking about the disrepair in their facilities. They were in a mess. So awards are an interesting way that they build credibility for people throughout this political system, and just keep that in mind. So at the same time, you should know that Hoffmeister was in the midst of her indictment scandal. And for those who aren't aware that are watching this, Joy Hoffmeister, she was elected in 2014 to be the state superintendent. She was a creation of the education establishment.
Oh, yes.
She worked directly with the woman, the top middle picture was the head of the teachers union at the time. The man on the right was the head of the school administrators union at the time. The other two people, the woman top left and the man bottom right, are in the political consultant class that are running money between candidates and special interests, and still are in our state, very, very active. Yep. So they were all indicted because they formed a nonprofit, a 501c4, which was supposed to be doing social welfare work, and they loaded it with money through these two education unions. Some of it flowed through those unions. It was really from a major insurer of public schools.
American Fidelity. We got to call these people out.
There you go.
Just American Fidelity is the one that sponsors all the leftist education garbage in Oklahoma.
Can I jump in here for just 1 second?
Absolutely.
I want to show the character difference between the Oklahoma Educators Hall of Fame that you were talking about earlier, because I just went on there and I wanted to just look at those inductees real quick. Well, look who we have in 2021 as the honorable state superintendent, Joy Hoffmeister. And I'm going to stress right here, the honorable.
Yes. And if you go down lower, you will find Stephen Crawford, who's here in this indictment picture as well.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say right here, let's just really explore the title honorable when they're talking about something like that. So it's a title of respect used in the United States, United Kingdom, Commonwealth countries to recognize a person's high position, morals, and worthiness of respect. So I just want to throw that in real quick, but back to you.
Don't forget, DA Prater never would investigate. Well, actually, the investigation was done by the OSBI, and it came, if you've ever read what the OSBI wrote in their research, it came out basically showing that they were all colluding on this, but David Prater would never do anything about it. So that's why she's honorable, because even though pretty much everybody knew that this happened, our former DA, David Prater, would not indict them, would not bring them to trial.
And it's really interesting because it goes so far beyond the pale. Yeah. And I encourage you. So on visit.com, the first series that launched this platform was called How to Steal a State. And it is essentially a novel that chronicles how the political class was coming through public education to steal control of the state.
Yep.
So if you want to know more about that, please go read How to Steal a State. It gives you all the details, but you're exactly correct. They were actually indicted. The evidence was all there. They were caught red-handed. And then DA David Prater, who's a Democrat, he was the Oklahoma County DA, in time for Hoffmeister's reelection campaign, said, we have new evidence against them, additional evidence that needs to be investigated. So we're going to drop charges and we'll get back to you.
Wow.
And guess what? He never got back to us.
Still waiting. Oh, I'm so tired. Still waiting.
Yes.
But she is honorable, Jenny.
Yes, the Honorable Miss Hoffmeister. So she was facing a scandal of her own at the time. And Espel would soon be facing another scandal of his own. So that's kind of a pattern in this, that they save people from scandal and then those people do their work. So Espel and Hoffmeister actually originally connected through higher education. And that's something I want people to understand too, is higher education has its hands and influence and is wrapped into the money that controls K through K-12 education. So a man named Dr. Ballard, that he's since deceased, recently deceased. He was the Tulsa Public Schools superintendent. He was head of the Oklahoma State School Board Association. So that's the other union that trains all of the local school board members across the state. And then most recently, he helped found the Janine Rainbolt College of Education at OU Tulsa. And they put in an education master's and doctoral programs. He was in charge of that. So as they were prepping Joy Hoffmeister to become the state superintendent, she had to quick hurry up and get her master's. So they sent her to Keith Ballard. At the same time, Aaron Espel was seeking his doctorate at the same college. And the two of them overlapped and sort of became the next anointed class of education establishment there. So, and you have to understand that the Rainbow College of Education is named after the widow of H.E. Gene Rainbolt. He is the founder of Bank First, and he has pumped a lot of money into progressive education causes that affect K through 12 education for years.
Oh, yes, he has.
He also, in the middle of Joy's scandal, generously contributed to the Joy Hoffmeister Defense Fund that was going to defend her after she was indicted along with the four others. So there's a higher education tie between these people that I think people need to be aware of. So let's move on a little bit. Dr. Espel, well, he wasn't doctor yet. He didn't have his PhD yet. And Keith Ballard recommended him to Cleveland. And I have a source that says that's the reason he got the job as superintendent. He was working on his doctorate under Keith Ballard at OU Tulsa. And Keith Ballard gave a great recommendation to the board out at Cleveland Public Schools. And that was the this was the straw that tipped his hiring there. Then you'll want to go read part 5 of our Harmful Coaches series. I won't go into it. His time at Cleveland was tumultuous, to say the least. There were, we actually got a hold of a letter that someone wrote to the school board at the time when he was out there, outlining a whole host of concerns that parents had about him, including he decided to coach the girls' basketball team himself, even though he was the superintendent, and had a violent incident in the locker room where he threw something and a girl was injured. That was covered up. An assistant coach was fired. And then there was a huge sex scandal involving another teacher. Actually, she was a speech pathologist. This is going to be kind of complicated, so stay with me here. When he came to the district, he hired 2 fellow coaches, one of whom was Michael Allen from back in his Little Axe days. Michael Allen is who Ashley Rowland brought forward as the man who drugged and raped her. He has many victims along the way. He went to Hinton after Little Axe, and he got a young woman pregnant who was a high school student. 5 years later, he married her. Espel hired both of them at Cleveland Public Schools. And then it is rumored that Espel had an affair with the wife of Michael Allen, who was Michael Allen's former victim. They both stepped down, Allen's wife and Espel, at the same time, mid-year, December 2019. So he is facing a career-ending scandal. Yet, Joy Hoffmeister snapped him up to the OSDE and gave him one of the highest titles in the agency. he became the executive director of school design and innovation.
Wow.
Mind you, he was coming from a district that he'd been running for a number of years that was an underperforming district. Yet he's going to lead school innovation and design. Okay. So he is saved from this scandal effectively by Joy Hoffmeister. Okay. So now this is where, go back to last month's state board meeting and Brad Clark being inserted by the AG into the state board. Okay. Brad Clark worked for Joy Hoffmeister as her lead counsel, and he was there in 2020 when Dr. Esbolt came to work there after his scandal. Okay. This is so.
Isn't this like the 7 degrees of separation?
We need to have a little theme song. It's a Small World, playing in the background. I mean, give me a break.
It is when you start to web together this upper elite of education, and you see how they cover each other's indiscretions, shall we say, and how they elevate each other and how they give each other awards in this false credibility that's happening. It's really like I was talking to one of the reporting victims, and I said, I feel like it's those paintings. Do you remember those digital pictures that were big in the 90s and they were all over office buildings where you could stand in front of it and it looked like an abstract, but if you stood there long enough and stared through it, you could see a picture in the background? That's what it feels like the upper establishment of public education really is. So Brad Clark was working there for the short time that Esbolt was there. And during that time, Ashley Rowland was starting to submit these statements from herself and her classmates about the sexual abuse they had endured. She was submitting it to the OSDE. They didn't have any investigators. There were all kinds of excuses. She was relentless, right? During that time, Brad Clark called Aaron Esbolt into his office and questioned him because his name was in those statements. So Brad Clark being inserted into this conversation of the state board when this man's certification is up for emergency suspension is a gigantic conflict of interest. Yeah. So I'll come back to this part, but I want to go down here and if you'll go to the article, there are actually 2 recorded conversations embedded in this article. You can hear the voices for themselves. Sometime after Esbolt is questioned by the OSDE about the accusations that Rowland is bringing forth, he gets her number from a third party and he calls her. And she has the quick-wittedness to record the conversation.
Yeah, trust me, Ashley scares me.
She is very,
you.
very smart, very determined young woman that wants to end this for not just herself, but every child in schools. So within this conversation, you can go listen to it for yourself. He specifically says the Department of Education, he tries to say he doesn't know about the accusations and about what happened to Ashley, but then she says the Department of Education said that they talked to you specifically about it. And he said they did. They called me into the office and they talked to me about it. So he confirms the conversation in a couple of different places. He says, like I said, I got called into the State Department when I worked there. Then after we were publishing about these accusations, a constituent from his district brought us another recording where she had recorded a conversation with him where he actually says, I got called into Brad Clark's office, the head attorney at the time, and he questioned me. So we have that embedded in the article as well. Brad Clark shouldn't be anywhere near this. No. Now, during the meeting, he recused himself in quite a soliloquy. He says, if you'll indulge me for a minute, when I was looking at the agenda last night on 7E, the name, which that was the Holland case, not the Esbolt case, is familiar. And he goes on to recuse himself because he brushed against this case during his time at the OSDE. And now that he's with the AG's office, he's saying, I can't give you advice on that case because that would be a conflict of interest. He was silent about the S-Bolt case.
How
He did not
bizarre.
say
Wow.
anything.
Now,
Okay.
now it's a conflict.
Yes. But
How
he did
bizarre.
go on to say about item 7D on the agenda, which was the S-Bolt case. He shot a verbal warning shot across the board. And he said, respect to anything was an emergency. The statute says here, he says, I'm familiar with those. You probably are. Others are as well. If the board makes a finding, it's required that the board determine that safety, welfare, health imperatively requires the emergency certification. So he's making this shot saying, if you can't say there's an emergency, you shouldn't do that. So he also, there were some other things in the meeting that I will talk a little bit about. You can go back to this, but he had a really convenient lapse of memory because now the board is stuck. They have to make a decision. They were forced to have Brad Clark there for their October meeting or they couldn't have met. They ended up tabling most of things because the board members did not feel comfortable about this, about him being their counsel. But he had this huge lapse of memory about what roles he had played in the past. So let me tell you the roles he played in the past. He worked for Joy Hoffmeister. He was the board counsel. He was also agency counsel. And if you go back and you dig through the minutes from the school board from 2015 to 2021, he was the only attorney sitting at that board table. He was giving advice to both the agency and the board. Yet, when one of the board members asked him specifically during last month's meeting, did you represent the department and the board, or was there always separate counsel? And he said, I don't recall, actually. So that's 6 years of his life, that's not that long ago, that he can't recall. So then Superintendent Walters brings it back up and says, you mentioned earlier, and he says, you said you couldn't remember if you were serving in both roles. Clark says, right. Walters says, you don't remember if you were general counsel for the agency and board attorney at the same time? And Clark continues to deny. No, there was some overlap, but that's been 6 years ago. Yada, yada, yada. The reason this is so important is they don't want to set the standard that the board could elect for OSDE counsel Michael Beeson to become both counsel for the agency and counsel for the board. They don't want to show that that has happened in the past, and I believe that they are trying to keep that from happening. Michael Beeson, from everything that I observe, is fighting faithfully to protect children in schools. And the moves that I've seen made from that legal department since he took it over would say that he's being protective and he's trying to take predators out of the school system. I believe they don't want him playing both those roles. So Clark is hesitant to admit that he played those roles for 6 years. Okay, moment of silence.
No, I mean, it's just, I'm not going to launch into another one of my tirades. I'll wait maybe till the end. But I guess the point of that I always go back to, and Michael will jump in on this with me. I'm so sick of hearing about we're a red state. I'm just so sick of hearing about it because I can promise you our entire education system is blue. And beyond even promising that, I mean, and I know there's some good teachers out there. I'm not going to get into the fringe crap. I'm just going to talk about the overall is just all of these people. They're all blue. They don't care about kids. It's all a power money game. I mean, how much money can I get out of this? And I feel so powerful because I have the name superintendent on my plaque or principal on my plaque or whatever, or school board member, because Michael will agree with me on that. School board members are absolutely absent on all of this stuff because they don't want to create waves. Plus then they're trained at OSBA to sit down and shut up and not say anything and rubber stamp everything the superintendent says. And, the people that we elect, unfortunately, are easily swayed, maybe. So they'll do it. It's like lapdog. Sure, whatever you want.
Yes, and that's we'll talk about that in a bit. But the training of both school boards and school administrators by the School Board Association and the School Administrators Association are a gigantic problem. We
need to get all of these associations out. I mean, because we have the same problem with our state governors association and our state superintendents association. And it's all of this crap needs to go away.
It does. And these people move about the system and they're there for a
Yes.
very long time. And they move from agency to agency. They move from government into these unions. It's, let me tell you a little bit about Brad Clark. So Brad Clark was
Amber.
former special assistant to Sandy Garrett. So when I say this is not about Walters, this is about anyone who the people elect that is not the chosen candidate of the establishment. So he worked for Sandy Garrett, and Sandy Garrett was the forever state superintendent, right? Yeah. Until term limits were enacted in 2010, right?
Right.
He was an attorney with the Hickman Law Group, and that's interesting because Hickman's wife is very much attached to the Epic situation. Clark was also Director of Legal Services and Policy at the Oklahoma Public School Resource Center. And we're going to talk about that too, because there are other organizations that are flowing money into this and have a lot of influence. That organization is funded by the George Kaiser Family Foundation, the Inasmuch Foundation. So George Kaiser money has been going into progressive public education causes for many decades, you could say generations now.
Yes.
Inasmuch Foundation may have started long ago with some good purposes, but they actually went into the redefining journalistic ethics.
Yes, they're terrible.
They fund Oklahoma Watch, just so you understand, Schusterman's, Walton's, cut from the same cloth, so everybody understands. And then he worked under Joy Hoffmeister as well. Yeah. So this is an education insider. He ended up hopping with some other folks straight over from Hoffmeister's administration to Attorney General Gentner Drummond's administration after the 22 election. So that tells you a lot about the alignment, the money that's behind their campaigns. And there's education-oriented minded money behind both of them. They both were funded by education. Both those campaigns were funded by big cannabis, gambling, the Native American tribes. There's a real political synergy. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican, follow the money. Nobody taught you that better than Jenny White.
Well, but let me ask you this question. Has Brad Clark ever, I think he had 2 years outside of the government system, didn't he? Or was he completely always, his paycheck came from taxpayers?
I think there was some overlap because he was working at Hickman, which is an independent, regular private sector law firm, but
sort of an independent.
Exactly. So I think his private sector experience also overlaps the education establishment.
But that's the other thing we have to, people who suck off the teat of the taxpayers are never going to have the taxpayers' interests at heart because it's free money. They don't care.
Exactly. And this play where we're inserting someone now into the Board of Education who's essentially a fixer for the education establishment.
Yeah, right.
That's not new. If you'll go back to when Janet Barisi was the state superintendent, Joy Hoffmeister was inserted into the State Board of Education to cause her problems. Yeah. So that is sort of one of the unethical political games that they play. Yeah. So now I got to go back. We're going to take a hop back. I know this is a lot of connections, but
you're confusing us all.
I know.
No. Hold on. Let me back up. The system is confusing us all.
It is. This is very complicated. So I want you to think about Dr. Espel has been saved by Hoffmeister. He's at the State Department of Ed, not for long. It's less than a year. And then April Grace is anointed. Dr. April Grace, she was the superintendent of Shawnee Public Schools, was sort of anointed as the establishment pick to replace Joy Hoffmeister as state superintendent. Okay. So they do all the typical ceremonial things. They make her superintendent of the year, even though this is what her district looked like when she left it, that we have 84% of the kids were below proficiency. But that's their pick for state superintendent. It's not about kids. So they pick her, but at the same time, the Ron Arthur scandal, the basketball coach we talked about, who've been abusing boys, sort of explodes onto the scene. It's brewing out there. People are talking about it. It's getting a little bit of media, okay? So this is really threatening her campaign. Around that time, very silently, Espelt moves from the State Department of Education to the Shawnee Public School District. He is hired as the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and Assistant Superintendent. But on the agenda for the Shawnee School Board meeting, when that happened, it was April of 2021, his name is mentioned nowhere. It's not in the minutes. It's not in the agenda. They just hired a CFO, Assistant Superintendent, which is really odd. Parents would have had no opportunity to say, who is this that they're hiring? If they looked at the agenda, where did he come from? What happened in Cleveland? It's very, very odd. So he has silently slipped into Shawnee Public Schools as the Arthur case is happening. So we know the rest of it. Arthur is eventually convicted, but at the time, April Grace is running for state superintendent. This scandal hits the fan. They're bringing in Espelt behind her, thinking she's going to become superintendent. And frankly, they need someone to cover. And I even have a quote from you, Jenny, in here that talks about, because of the scandal, she should never be state superintendent. Okay. Eventually, she lost. This really hurt her campaign because people could see the court documents said that they did nothing to protect children. They knew this was going on. They did a bunch of Title IX investigations. They put him on correction plans that said things like, read this book or take this online training, as if that is how you stop a pedophile in schools. So it's blatant, gross neglect. And there is a civil suit pending on this matter saying against the district and against Arthur, saying they failed to protect. So April Grace, she's their choice. She loses to Ryan Walters in the primary for the 22 election. And she decides she's stepping down. She's going to retire from public education after the loss. And she goes on to work and become the executive director at the Oklahoma Public School Resource Center, where Brad Clark used to be an attorney. So we've got a failing district and a failure to protect kids, but there's a cushy $160,000 job waiting for you in one of the education establishment organizations.
Well, but that's less than she was getting at superintendent at Shawnee. I'm sure she was making 250 something taxpayer dollars at Shawnee, but
close to 200, but as she's still the executive director at OPSRC, and she's collecting her teacher's retirement. So she's probably making a lot more than she was making at Shawnee. Okay. So this was a really good quote. According to a longtime teacher at Shawnee Public Schools that I interviewed, April Grace was running for state superintendent. So they brought in Espelt from the OSDE. I think so much happened with Grace related to Ron Arthur that Espelt knew a lot of the key factors about the district's action, and he was safe for the board to keep. He knew the dirty secrets. So Espelt then is moved from assistant superintendent to superintendent. So I think it's important that people understand that he's played a role in some of these higher decisions in public education. So when he comes into Shawnee, they had just had a tornado rip through the town.
Yeah.
And I had someone tell me that they really felt like the community was trauma bonded to him. They didn't really have time to mentally vet him. And he was kind of saying the right words. He was saying, yes, we need more transparency. We're going to get through this civil lawsuit. We're going to protect kids, and we're going to respect parents' rights. So those were his big messages. And here he is on a local podcast saying exactly that about respecting parents. But that hasn't really played out as spoken, because one of the first actions in the civil case against the district related to Ron Arthur is that, well, first of all, Shane Jett, you have to understand that Shane Jett, as I said, stepped in. When they could get nothing done about Ron Arthur, he stepped in, he got the AG involved, he got the district attorney down, he got the criminal prosecution going, And the victims were coming to him because the school district, the local
Yeah.
sheriff, law enforcement would not listen. So he
Right.
was smack dab in the middle of this, making it happen. Well, one of the first actions with Dr. Esbolt as superintendent was that he subpoenaed Shane Jett, the district subpoenaed Shane Jett, and demanded all of the information and communications related to the victims that he had talked to, related to their families. And so these minor victims have not. This suit was filed as a John Doe. The district is now demanding to out these people. They also sent a similar subpoena to the sheriff's department. So this is really not looking like they're protecting children. An inside source says that on April 1st of this year, that the board met, and they met with an executive session, which apparently they're allowed to do in Shawnee, but the state board is not allowed to do, and that they discussed this move. They discussed sending these subpoenas with their counsel, and that Dr. Aaron Esbolt was present. So this is scary. This is whistleblowers.
Oh my God.
Coming forward have no place to go.
Like Dana says, you can't make this up.
Yeah. I mean, how's it even possible?
Yes, it is crazy. So in sort of a whisper of what some of the progressive agenda may be behind this, Jett was served his subpoena in his Capitol office, and I interviewed someone it was actually Roberta Lewis. She's the founder of the Moms for Liberty chapter out there in Pottawatomie County. I interviewed her. She was in Jett's outer office, and the door was open to the inner office when the process server came in to serve Jett. And she described him as a very flamboyant trans person. She said that it was a man with broad shoulders, square jawline, shoulder length, green streaked blonde hair, wearing a bright green tube top, high heeled shoes, and jeans with his bare midriff showing. And those are her words. And he burst into Jett's inner office where he was having a meeting with multiple other people, and threw the process documents across the desk and said, "Shane David Jett, you've been served. F you from the trans community." So he was then chased out of the office. Security escorted him out of the building. The sheriff's department got a similar visit, getting their subpoena.
Okay, can I just make a statement here?
Yes.
For people that don't know, you can pick your own process server.
Good
the
point.
court doesn't pick the process server because you have to pay the process server. So you pick your own process server. Now let that sink in a minute.
Exactly. And on the documents that are filed within the court case, you'll typically see who the process is, and there's a portion of that subpoena that's filled out after it's been delivered, and it says who the process server are. They're verifying that they served it, what time. No signature, no name on this one. So you don't get to know who that was.
But you can't do but you can't do that. You are entitled to know who your accuser is.
Well, we don't. We know who the accuser is in this. We know who sent the process server.
Okay,
but we do not have the name of the process server.
Oh, okay. No, I thought you meant the subpoena. No,
Exactly.
No, you have to have that.
Yes. So,
although not so much, because I know of somebody, Robin Carter, who was served. Well, the OSBI came and raided her house in the morning and showed her a warrant, but then they never ever were able to get to the bottom of who actually served that warrant and why. So there you go.
Wow.
Oh yes. So if your DAs decide they don't want to prosecute stuff, they just won't. So people, pay attention to your DAs.
Amen. It's a very important position. Okay, Michael, can you flip me back to my slides?
Okay, before we go on, if you're going to stop there a second, I want to pull in a comment that Amber made for us to go
Great.
over. Has anyone connected or worked with any other organizations working these issues in other states? Would there be a path forward to get this handled at a federal level with the new administration coming in? Usually AGs will connect with other state AGs to handle business. So is there a workaround when the AGs are protecting the predators?
That's a really.
Oh, wait. Oh, seriously? He admitted that he reported Robin Carter? Wow. So our Secretary of Elections reported Robert Carter. Okay. That's interesting to say that he admitted that. Okay. So anyway, back to Amber's original comment.
Yes. That is a fantastic line of thinking, because if you look at all the issues that our AG has weighed in on education, he is firmly on the side of the establishment.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that here in a minute. And the issues that really matter to us in the state, like the Biden, Missouri case, which is the biggest government censorship operation ever. And many AGs weighed in on that. He did not. He stayed silent. He did not join that suit to protect our rights of free speech and the government censoring us through big tech companies.
We need to remember this when he decides he wants to run for governor, don't we?
We certainly do. But with a new president and executive branch coming into our government, I think that's really good thinking. I don't know offhand, but I certainly can look into that. Okay, so we talked about that. Now I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about who these people are, who these actors are in this system of protection. So we know we have the ed unions and the organizations. We've talked about a lot that. There are some legislators. There's a group of legislators that have their hands in this for sure. The Attorney General seems extremely interested in everything education and is inserting himself. And then the legacy media is playing a huge, huge part. So this is the slide for you, Jenny. And I think for people who don't understand how political public education is, they need to understand the money, just briefly, behind public education. Don't be confused by this pie chart. The 5,651 here in education, that's actually in millions, so that's billions. We have a state budget of almost $12 billion annually. 5.7 billion of it goes to education. And that's K through 12 education and higher education. They have very aligned financial interests, just like we see the people from OU Tulsa starting to inject political candidates into the system. They are very much aligned. When one gets more money, the other do too. Oh, that's a good idea, Steph. It could not hurt to email Matt Gaetz.
Yes, for sure.
As we all have a moment of celebration.
Yeah, he's got to get confirmed, though.
Yep. And indirectly, like Jenny was saying, these ed unions and organizations are funded by state funds. They're all nonprofits. They're all technically outside of government, but we send the money to education in our state. The teachers are paid with that money. They pay dues to these organizations. School boards and school administrators are required to pay for training through these educations. That's how they make a huge bulk of their money. And then there's other money influencing the system, like we talked about. There's other organizations. So just for those of you not super familiar, these are the biggies. So this is a slide. This is just a screenshot from the Oklahoma Education Coalition. So this is where they all get together, and there are these political organizations that collaborate to serve the interests of adults working in public education.
Wait. It's not for the kids, but they always say, but it's for the children.
Yeah. What? Well, and I think it's important that people know that the OEA, they're super well funded. The OEA brings in about $7.4 million a year. That's the teachers union. The school COSA, the school administrators union, Pam Deering, Dr. Pam Deering, who's their executive director, former big school superintendent, $195,000 a year plus her teacher's retirement, right? The OSSBA, which is their OSB, they train all local school board members. Dr. Sean Himes, he is a former Enid superintendent, and he makes $327,000 a year running that organization, plus his
Didn't
entire.
Sean recently step down though?
You may be right. No, I think he's still there.
Okay. All right.
I think he's still there.
Sorry.
And then they have 2 deputy directors. That one is Dr. Joe Ciano, and he was the Norman superintendent. And they make 6-figure salaries. So this system is run by former superintendents. And when you think about sort of the unspoken policy, actually it's spoken policy, it's not written policy that they're training. And I've spoken to school board members who say, well, they told me, COSA said, once this person in my district who's accused of this crime against children resigns, there's nothing I can do about it. It's no longer in my hands. Right?
Right. Yes.
So that's how our school administrators are being trained. School board members, school administrators, they're calling these organizations for legal counsel. And that's what they're getting. And in sincerity, they're believing it. They're believing that they're legally bound to let that person step down and move on. So these same superintendents that created this network of passing the trash are now running these organizations. And Enid, where Sean Heim was superintendent for many years, there's articles out there right now saying they have a systemic problem of hiding crimes against children. So that legacy lives on. All right.
Wow.
That's a little bit messed up here, but let me tell you what it says. So the OEA and COSA, we know that they're super aware of the child sexual abuse epidemic. Their legal defense services are their #1 recruiting tool for members and perhaps for predators. So I just have to take a step back and say, if you're offering these services, and this screenshot, I'm sorry, it's a little strange on your end, not on mine. If you're saying on your website at White & Weddell, who is the contracted firm that will defend you if you're a member of the OEA or of COSA, false allegations against teachers typically involve accusations of crimes like statutory rape or assault. These are serious crimes. And they go on to say how we're going to defend you on these. And they're often a civil case with it. You don't want to lose your house. This is how they recruit. And if you'll notice, what's never mentioned is that any of these accusations are true, ever. They're treated as false accusations. They don't mention victims. They don't even acknowledge that these things actually happen. Only that educators or administrators are accused and they need to be defended, which is difficult to hear. Now, if the system really wanted to protect kids, wouldn't there be some kind of statement of no tolerance of internal abuse? Wouldn't every policy handbook in these districts say that they have no tolerance of any sexual misconduct related to students? Well, I've been looking and I've been digging through district policy handbooks. I've been digging through things from these organizations, and it doesn't exist. No one says, if you work here and do this, we will prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. No one says that. But what they do have are non-disclosure agreements for their staff. And their staff cannot talk about these things. So instead of having the policies that openly protect kids and no tolerance for this, they have defense lawyers.
And defense lawyers who are paid for with taxpayer dollars.
Exactly. So we talked a little bit about the Oklahoma Public School Resource Center. Brad Clark worked there. Now Dr. April Grace, who didn't protect kids in Shawnee, failed at the superintendent's race. She's running the place. It's funded. Here's board members. They have board members like Big Banking, like we talked about, the Inasmuch Foundation, George Kaiser. These are very progressive organizations, and they seem to grab and protect people and employ them after scandal.
Well, but look, wait, back up, because people won't catch this. Scott Smith, Executive Director, Arkansas Public School Resource Center, who funds the Arkansas, and I'm just guessing, who would fund the Arkansas Police or Public School Resource Center? Walton Foundation, because Walmart's right in their backyard. So again, this is just same stuff, different day.
Exactly.
And by the way, Lee Denny, who is the treasurer, Lee Denny used to be a representative in the Oklahoma legislature from the Cushing area. And Lee Denny was a massive supporter of Common Core in Oklahoma, even though she was a registered Republican. Massive supporter. Fought us all the way.
Interesting.
Just thought I'd let you know. History is important, people.
It is. It is. And connecting these dots is very important for people to understand who's really running public education. So the other part of that network, that's the system protecting all of this, is legislatures. They're very funded by a lot of this education money that's rolling around in a lot of these entities that we've talked about. But why were these legislators specifically interested in the Oklahoma State Board of Education's executive sessions and nothing else? So it all sort of started with Senator Mary Boren. She's a Democrat of the Boren clan. She's married to David Boren's cousin. She started this, and then the two other notable, and there's quite a few of them. There's quite a few legislators that have been involved in that or have come to these recent State Board of Education meetings to sit in the gallery and intimidate and hear what's going on. They were never there before. Representative James Mark McBride, and we've talked a little bit about him. He is headed out on term limits. We shared some information about how he was never vetted. And there are some serious considerations now that he's at the end of his term that no one ever found out about in his personal history. We've talked about that on the previous podcasts, but I will add to it that a source says that his son was recently detained or arrested at the Capitol, very erratic, threatening to do things to representatives and senators, and he was detained by the security there at the Capitol.
Mark McBride's son.
Yes. So it's just a very odd situation. And we talked to you before about there's public records, his court documents about his second marriage. She had a stroke, and there's some filings in there saying he left her destitute. He moved her into a facility she didn't want to be in. She was very young to be there, that there were accusations of verbal and physical abuse. And then Senator Adam Pugh that we talked about, he's from District 41. He was involved in that Title 12, the civil title that put a restriction of 2 years on suing a school district. And he's in there trying to stop those sessions. So they're a big part of this network. And then we talked also about Attorney General Drummond. And this isn't his first intervention into this particular administration. He intervened on rule changes. That's where the State Board of Education starts to change the rules about when they can step in on accreditation. They were doing some things like tying student results to a school's accreditation. They were doing things like tying teacher misconduct to a school's accreditation level. So for those who don't really understand that, they were tying the money to kids' outcomes and keeping kids safe. Well, Attorney General Drummond stepped in and said, you don't get to make your own rules anymore. They have to go through the legislature. Yeah. We've got this executive session fight. He stepped in on a records request fight, which is really ironic if you're a journalist, because Joy Hoffmeister's administration is where open records requests went to die. The funding scandal, apparently AG Drummond stepped in about how the OSCE was withholding funding on security funding for schools. And another issue, it turned out a loft report came out. None of that was so. It was actually legislative mistakes that didn't code that the right way and didn't make those funds specifically stated to be rollover funds that were keeping those funds, yet the media ran with it. And now the board attorney scandal, where he has replaced the State Board of Ed's attorney with a highly conflicted insider.
Okay, before we move on, I want to catch you up on a couple of things we've got. Dr. Pelham said, alternatively, if you're reporting on higher administration, those organizations investigate you and gaslight you into not pursuing. And then if they do help you, then they make you sign an NDA to silence you and shut you up. So, and she knows. So there you go.
Well,
And then also,
well, just to make a quick comment, we've seen, Jenny, over and over and over again, how all these schools, all they want to do is everything in-house. They don't want it. They want to do their own investigations, their own people, all their own stuff. They don't want a single thing going outside the school.
well, because
Correct.
there'd be accountability outside the school.
Yeah.
And so Amber says, okay, just a thought. Some school districts receive money from the federal government, in particular from the Department of Defense, because of their student populations being children of military service members. If this is happening in schools receiving that funding, it could be another avenue to look at this issue. So Oklahoma schools get these funds, just trying to think outside the box to find avenues. The nominated Secretary of Defense is an amazing pick, and praying he's confirmed. So that, I mean, I'm hopeful, and I think most of our viewers are hopeful that once we get this new administration, we'll have some different avenues, maybe to nail down these people.
Mhm.
Now that doesn't, like I said, and like Michael have said, we firmly believe Trump can't fix this stuff here. We are still going to have to stay on that, but with a better administration, more cynical of public schools than we've had before, certainly, I think there is a possibility for that. And then, you know, as Steph points out, so to keep a job, you have to sign an NDA. And I don't think people understand, and I'll be frank, I didn't understand how prevalent NDAs were within government, and I'm just finding that out. And I find that to be completely incongruent with what government is supposed to be. Government is supposed to be open and transparent and in favor of the people, not the businesses, not this stupid protectionist system of the elites. It's not supposed to be any of that. But now you're really seeing these NDAs come out, and you're seeing people say, hey, I had to sign an NDA. I can't do anything. This is absolutely wrong. I mean, wrong on so many levels I couldn't possibly say, but so giant mushroom cloud wrong.
Yes, the lack of transparency, the intentional lack of transparency is really frightening. And because we're talking about children, and we're going to be non-transparent about what we're doing in the system that keeps your kids for 7 hours a day. It's very scary. The last piece of this puzzle that I will just kind of cover is, yes, we have these organizations working to protect. They're working with the legislators. The legislators are bouncing off the AG, and they're all working together to do this. But the media is the other critical piece. So in September, related to the accusations against Dr. Espol, and I'm just using the Oklahoman as an example, they all pick up and say the same thing. They wouldn't talk about the direct accusations against him. They wouldn't talk about the victim statements that had already been published. There were no attempts to contact Dr. Espol. They just cherry picked the quotes that they wanted out of our publication in an effort to protect. And then after the October 24th meeting, where Brad Clark was inserted into the Board of Ed, this is the quote: Drummond suggested Clark, who has served as both the State Education Department and Board of Education attorney at different times under then State Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister, Walter's predecessor. Well, it's interesting that they put served as both and linked and said at different times. Again, I'm telling you, they do not want for Michael Beeson to become counsel for both the board and the OSDE because he's trying to protect children. So here, the Oklahoman lied and said that Brad Clark, when he was at the OSDE, did not fill those roles at the same time. That is a lie. The ironic thing, where they link, where it says served as both, to a non-doc article, non-doc, which is an independent publication here, accurately reflected that Brad Clark filled both of those roles from 2015 to 21 in that article. So they're saying He never did it both at the same time, but here's a link to someone that did what V1SUT did. We dug through all the meeting minutes, and he absolutely did serve in those roles. So the media is just so overtly carrying water for these people in this protection that it is almost frightening. People will come out of this believing that the AG is saving the taxpayers' money and that the board should choose Brad Clark as their permanent attorney because that will save taxpayers money. That's how it was caged in the meeting and how the media is saying it. And that this was some gracious move for them to fill in while they're looking for another attorney. Not so. Yes. Yeah, lastly, I would say, when I look back and I see something differently, like I said about the Hall of Fame at the OSDE, which is the Hall of Shame, frankly, I say it. And I'm also looking back to when the current administration at the OSDE earlier this year cut ties with COSA and the OSSBA, so the School Administrators Association, and the folks training our school board members, and said, we're not going to have any more sole source relationship where you're providing all of this training.
We keep saying training. I would substitute in like the word mandating or brainwashing or
Indoctrination.
Indoctrinating. I mean, that is what that is. And we talked to Jenny. Remember, we talked to Elaine Ashley, and she was telling us a little bit about that training up there and just how ridiculous it was.
Oh, we've talked to so many school board members who just say, yeah, they pretty much train you to shut up and sit down and do everything that the superintendent tells you.
Pretty much.
I mean, so we know that that's true. So I want to go back to make a point about what you said about removing those photos in the education building. And your constant reporting, because you've said it over and over again, and I hope it's just sinking into people. They give each other awards because that makes them look better, and it fluffs up their appearance to the public. So the public says, because we've indoctrinated the public to believe that awards are good, right? So this is how the public gets bought in. And I got wise to this when, I'm trying to think. So 2002, our son was born, and we had an adorable little house in a small area, but the public school wasn't good. And so, my husband and I were talking about, okay, well, we probably need to move to a different district so we can get a better school. So we looked around and decided we would go back to my old neighborhood because I grew up in Quail Creek, and there was Quail Creek Elementary. And we just believed, Quail Creek was nice. It was clean. It was good. Mm-hmm. We graduated from there. It would be great. It was a blue ribbon school. And I was looking at the number of times that it had become a blue ribbon school. And so I convinced myself that a blue ribbon school was going to be one of the greatest places to go because it's a blue ribbon school. It's a pretty good award. So after they'd been in school for a couple of years at Quail Creek Elementary. And before I started, and I was starting to go, oh my God, there's no learning being done here. And when I try to get involved and suggest we do learning, that's not something that they're interested in. That's when I got really super curious about all this stuff. And when I actually started ROPE was right around that time. And I went back to look at a blue ribbon school. People, I suggest you get on the interwebs and find out about blue ribbon schools. It's exactly what Mary is saying. It's a bunch of people who are invested in mediocrity in public education, providing a bunch of garbage to schools to influence parents into believing a thing that's not happening.
Yes.
Promise. You can check me up. You're always willing to check me up. You go check me up. And if you find out I'm wrong, please tell me. I suspect you won't be able to, however.
What does that say about our precious Edmond, Oklahoma, and their 11 blue ribbon award-winning schools?
But you're
11.
never going to get parents who dump their kids off at school because they don't want to take time to deal with them themselves to understand that that's all bunk. Because if it were all bunk and they believed that, they would be completely remiss in dropping their children off. And not only completely remiss, I would say that that would be some form of actual child neglect then, that they would be guilty of, because you know that this is a bad system and yet you drop your kid off there anyway, not worrying about it. So Becky says, thank you so much for sticking with your investigations. The tensions were obvious at the last state meeting, that understanding these connections would be hard without all your dedication, because it's true. Nobody knows what goes on here. Amber says they do that in the military too, the giving the props and leave the good ones behind and boost up for their agenda. It's part of how the swamp is created. It totally is. And if we get off of this podcast in a day and either Michael and I or both of us don't in unison tell you guys to wake up and be skeptical, you guys have got to become skeptics. And I mean, I know it's a sad thing to do, to go, oh, really? That's bad too. You need to just be skeptical of everything at this point. And certainly anything involved with public education should endure your skepticism before it does anything else. Am I wrong, Michael?
You're not wrong at all. And the results speak for themselves. I mean, do you have an illiterate population coming out of Edmond, coming out of Oklahoma? Or do you have massively educated kids with critical thinking skills that are going to contribute to society? I mean, it's that simple.
No.
Every time I hear somebody in Oklahoma say, I could have went, or you read a chyron that's at the bottom of the local news or whatever, and you can't find at least 5 misspellings, it's a banner day. I mean, because we even have reporters who will say, I could have went, or she would have ran, and you're like, oh my God, we don't even teach people how to conjugate verbs in Oklahoma anymore. It's absolutely pathetic. And yes, I am the daughter of a 35-year public school English teacher in Oklahoma. And so it does stick out like a sore thumb to me, but it does make us look like a whole bunch of Hicktown hickeys. I can promise.
Well, Mary, do you want me to put that other screen back up that you have?
Yes, would you? I want to give, first of all, Becky, thank you. Those are very kind words. And to everybody who's listening, who I see so many names on here who are very engaged in this fight. And I love grassroots people. Keep doing what you're doing. I just want to give you an example of why parents should not trust the facade of awards. Okay. So if this sounds familiar, this is the brother of Sean Heim, who runs the Oklahoma State School Board Association, who used to be the superintendent in Enid. This is his brother, who is the longtime superintendent in Lawton. Okay. So these organizations down the bottom here, COSA or whatever, made him 2022 Superintendent of the Year, made his wife Central Office Administrator of the Year. Pam Deering has a little something down here about her, right? So this is within an article that I did about this. In Lawton, this is a woman. Yeah. This woman masqueraded as a man. Every parent believed that this was a man in Lawton. The administration knew. They have to do background checks. They have to submit all of these things. And this woman masquerading as a man, a parent tracked her daughter, volleyball player daughter's cell phone, because she kept disappearing. And this woman was sexually abusing her daughter at this coach's house. So they kept this from parents. Do not buy the awards. The awards are a facade of credibility and safety.
We'll go back to that Heim slide real quick. I want to show you something also.
Okay. Let me grab this and there you go.
All right, here we go. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
2024 inductee.
Yep.
To the Oklahoma Education Hall of Fame.
Hall of-
Welcome.
Yep. That's it. You do our bidding and you are awarded and rewarded.
So what Dana said, awards are payments for complicity.
Exactly. Well said.
So I've been looking at this. Let me just pull something in really fast.
Well, Mary, after the show, I want to talk to you about that whole Cleveland incident, because I was just looking at something why it would, that's such a small little town.
Yes.
But I may have found one or two little connections that you may want to look at there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
Okay, so Sean Heim has been the OSSBA executive director since 2014, served 6 years as superintendent of Enid Public Schools. And here's the interesting thing. So I was just looking. Here's their board of directors. The officer is Rick Gowan of North Rock Creek Public Schools. The president-elect is Melissa Abdo of Jenks Public Schools. And Melissa Abdo, that's a very interesting thing. Known Melissa Abdo for a long time. First got to know her during the Tea Party, where she espoused views and things that were not at all like the views that she espouses now. She began the Legislative Council, Parents Legislate PLAC up in her area in Jenks. And then proceeded to do, after she did that, she became president of that, and then spent the entire time running us down and elevating all of this noxious garbage that we've just been talking about here. So these people, they become imbued with this sense of, oh, look, I'm on this thing now. And I don't know if that's the case with Melissa Abdo. I have no idea what her deal is, but I'm just saying it sure seems like they get involved in this kind of stuff. It becomes a big deal. Now, all of a sudden, I'm on this board. I'm on this board. Nobody gives a rat's butt what board you're on if you really care about kids. But that's not ever what this is about. It's making yourself look better to community members, to other people. And I'm just exhausted of it. And I will call this out all day, every day. So sick of this. Amber says, my daughter had that professor in the right in that photo at UCO, and she was pissed because he continually talked about, I'm paraphrasing, white man bad. She filed several complaints to the university.
Wow.
Yeah, put that picture back up there so we can see who that was exactly.
Melissa Abdo?
No, on your screen. On your screen, Amber said that the guy on the right side of that UCO photo was
Oh, that one. Okay, I thought you meant me.
Well, and coming out of Jenks, you have to understand that that's Kirby Lehman's territory, and you'll find him also in the Hall of Fame. Within the court documents, when Joy Hoffmeister and the union heads and the political consultants were indicted for using dark money, she specifically says in her communications that they captured that he, the superintendent of Jenks, is the one who, quote, recruited her. So from Jenks came Joy Hoffmeister.
Yeah, this is true.
Yep. Okay. Well, we've beat the horse. I thank everyone for listening, for everyone who's reading, for everyone who's spreading the content, and who is really engaged trying to protect kids.
Yeah, and all of you who are watching today, we've got a nice audience this morning. Thank you so much for watching. And I know that you guys are engaged. And I know that, like Dana, you're out there, in the trenches. And I know, Amber, you're always doing stuff. And I totally get it, that you guys are engaged. But boy, we've got to get other people in on this who are going to. We've got to change the culture of parents, certainly more. There's so many that are just would be on the edge of stepping out to homeschooling, for example, or at least fighting in their own school. Because, when we first started, we were Reclaim Oklahoma Public Education. That's what ROPE stood for originally. Because our point was, if we're going to spend tax dollars on this, really what we need to do is get it back and make it function, not just be this cesspool of I'll scratch my back, you scratch yours. Wait, that didn't come out right. Here you go, Michael.
Well, I would
That's right.
say as a closing tip, there is a State Board of Education meeting 1 week from today at 1 p.m. And perhaps a good showing of people who understand that there's a huge conflict of interest rolling there that is not serving our children wouldn't be such a bad thing.
Well,
You
but
can,
I don't.
you can
let me
walk
ask
down
you
the hall that is no longer the Hall of Shame.
well, let me ask you about that, though, Mary. I mean, I don't go to those meetings anymore. I mean, it's hard for me because I'm out in the boonies, but I don't go to those meetings anymore because it's become this, we hate Ryan Walters. We love Ryan Walters. We hate Ryan Walters. It's completely unhelpful. I'm done with that stuff. It's stupid and I don't want to play that game. So how do you even then get into a board of education? Because I'll be straight up about this too. I personally asked Walters when I saw him one time before he cut me off completely. I asked him, I said, look, you need to get a bigger room for these school board meetings because you could use the one over at the Capitol, the Senate room on the 4th floor at the Capitol on the south side of or north side of the building. You could use any place, but you can't get enough people in here who really care because they started to use this because it confined the number of people who could get in because all they really wanted originally was the education establishment in there just to, play the same thing that we've talked about here, the inner circle game, the elitist inner circle game. But we've got to have it in a better venue where more people can attend and listen what's going on. And I get that it's live streamed and people can hear it, and I get that, but it would be nice to be there. But really, honestly, Mary, what is the purpose of going to these meetings?
You make a good point. And let me tell you, I have mixed feelings about that, about moving it, because I can tell you from personal experience, no one was clamoring to move these meetings when Joy Hoffmeister or Sandy Garrett were holding the superintendent seat. And I think some of the reservation that is coming here is that just the small area that they have it and the people that they were letting in since Walters became the superintendent were incredibly disruptive. I've never seen anything like it. So there were some scenes there, and making it bigger runs almost a guaranteed risk that the disruptions become more. So I do see that. And the fact that it is live streamed, I think there's an overflow area where people can also be there to show their either support, non-support, things they're upset about. There is outside before the meeting is more of the interaction than anything. But there's an overflow area where people can watch on closed captioning if they're not allowed into the main meeting area. I personally would be concerned if they moved it to a big venue because I have seen more insanity in the last less than 2 years of this particular seated Board of Education than ever in the history of this board.
Well, but you know me. I mean, that to me is the small price you pay for liberty. I mean, and free speech. And there should be sheriff's deputies in there just, hauling those people out every time they make a disturbance, because it's not okay for them to do that. If they want to sit there, that's fine. But it shouldn't be a problem for me to go in and sit in on a meeting quietly because other people are disrupting. The easy way to solve that problem is you get the sheriff's deputies over there to just haul them out every time they open their big fat mouths.
And I've witnessed that. So, and that's exactly why I have mixed feelings. I said I have mixed feelings about this because I have witnessed it. I even witnessed, everyone probably did on Facebook or whether you were there live, a mother who was so dysregulated that her child was crying and the children had to be left behind. And it's just, at some point, it interferes with the business of the board and the business of the people. They were doing important things.
And I agree with that. And you're exactly correct. That can't happen. But yeah, that stuff has got to be, I mean, I guess the point is I've been an administrator. I was the administrator of a town. I mean, there are ways that you make things happen and you just have to put your foot down and do them. And I get very frustrated with well, Okay, stop welling and get the work of the taxpayers done. However that works, do it. But
I
in all
understand.
honesty, if you're sitting in the overflow room there and you're just watching it on closed caption, I don't have time to take out of my day to just go do that. I don't know how that's helpful. And I'm really literally asking you this question because I don't know.
Yes, I'd rather be home with a cup of coffee at my own computer watching it live. Absolutely. So, yes. And I will say, I give a big compliment to, there's some security staff there at the building. It's all very safe. It's been tumultuous, but they've done a really good job. There are Oklahoma Highway patrolmen that are there every single time, and they're very respectful and they do amazing work. So it's not an unsafe environment. It's just gotten really disruptive. And if there hadn't been problems, and if people could understand that you don't go to a state board of education meeting to say anything. Now there's an opportunity at early in the morning, you can be put on a list, and they have a lottery, and there are like 10 slots where you can be in public comment. And I encourage anybody to do that and come express these things. And if you're worried about these conflicts of interest, but they just were having trouble with, it was incredibly disruptive, and people didn't understand that you're there to observe, mouths shut, and they couldn't do it. They could not do it.
Well, it's the dysregulated society. Like you said, I love that word. Today, we're completely dysregulated.
Yes.
We don't get our information from our parents or from teachers. We get them from pink-haired, screaming TikTok talkers. And people literally don't my mother, my kids called her Mimi, and she used to have what we would call laughingly Mimi's Manners Camp for the kids when they started to get dysregulated in their manners. And I think we need to throw all of these people in Mimi's Manners Camp is what I think. Becky says, those meetings seem like a complete circus and unproductive. Are there leaders who are listening? From this presentation, we have a long list of those who are actively ignoring the continued problems. Are there any who want to find a route to remove the systemic problems? I think that's a great point. And then we've got another commenter on Rumble. Do you feel like eliminating the Federal Department of Ed will help or hurt our efforts?
Question to me. I think it will help. That is an agency that has not been around long in our history. It's just another example of putting someone else between the people and their government. A lot of the very progressive training that is going into Oklahoma school districts directly to the teachers is tied to federal money.
Yeah.
So they make these rules. If you're getting this grant to serve kids in this way or that way, or kids at need, you have to attend these trainings. You have to go to these conferences. These conferences are not helping us. This is how they're injecting an ideology that is completely destructive. So if they were to eliminate the U.S. Department of Education, I would applaud.
Yeah, I would. And I'm in 100% agreement with that, because that's absolutely. But then again, it's private organizations in Oklahoma now, like the Inasmuch Foundation and the Walton Foundation and some of these other foundations that are injecting their stuff into public education, and you can't get to the root of those. Edmond Public Schools, for example, Michael, they have their own foundation, then they take grants from other things. Like they had, what was it? Was it $1 million grant to fund SEL in Edmond?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, something like that. So in all answer to PT Pod on our
it's a good question.
Rumble channel, it's not just the federal department that's doing it. These other nonprofits come in and then do the same thing. Well, we're going to give you $1 million for SEL, so here's what we want you to do. Check off the list to get this money. And because public schools are never about kids. They're always about money. They're always more interested in what they can do to get the money than what they can do for kids, because obviously, if they're taking the money, it's going to be for kids, and they checked off their box, right? Well, we did something for kids. We got this blah that did blah, but again, that should be the school board too that stands up and says, we're not taking this grant. We're not allowing these nonprofits in these schools to do this kind of stuff.
And we saw And we saw how, like the library books, I mean, that came down
Yeah.
from basically the federal level at the National Library Association, making, pretty much saying, these are the books we'd like to see in all the schools. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
whole plethora of, it's that spider web that Mary has exposed here is an even larger web, when it comes to the federal level.
Precisely.
Yes.
And then there's a really bizarre local level to it before underneath this level that we're
Yeah.
talking about at the state level. Because look at sometimes districts that get dangerous, I observe have a lot of NGO activity. So if you look at Shawnee Public Schools, it is flowing with nonprofit money. And there's something called the Avitas Foundation that is flowing money into these different nonprofits that are now in the schools daily. Then all the teachers wear the hashtag We Care shirts. That's from the nonprofit. And are they necessarily aligned with what the parents would like being pumped into their children? We don't know. Are they vetted, these people that are coming into the schools, in the same way the law requires teachers and school staff to be vetted? There's so many questions that are unanswered for me.
Absolutely. And Dana makes a really good point to answer our Rumble commenter. Teachers unions helped influence the DOE and have too much power within the government, include with the government to come after groups that speak out against their agenda. And we saw that with, and I can't even remember who his name was now. It completely eludes me. Under Obama. He did that. And then we had that with the school textbooks and them going around and when parents started to speak out, then they got the Department of Justice involved, and the Department of Justice was going to go after parents for speaking against library books. So it's absolutely ridiculous. So he asks, is the meeting next week open to the public, and can we sign up to speak?
So it's at 1:00 next Thursday, and it is at the State Department of Education. And you'll have to go look on their website, because I'm not sure, this is not one of their typical morning meetings, but there will be a time at which they start signing people up for the public speaking lottery. So you go and you put your name down, and then they do just a random draw. And that is absolutely open to everybody. That doesn't necessarily mean you'll be sitting in the room of the board meeting. You may be in overflow, and then they'll call your name to speak if you're chosen. But you do, from what I have witnessed, they choose those speakers at the beginning. So if you've got the speaking slot, you don't necessarily have to hang around in overflow. You can go watch it on your own live feed if you want to. But yes, I encourage everyone with these concerns I've never heard anything brought up by a public speaker at one of these State Board of Ed meetings about things like this conflict of interest, about things like these nonprofits, about things about protecting kids. I've yet to hear it really be brought up. So I encourage you.
Well, and I also do think too, that it's almost actually better if what will happen is people who watch this podcast, you guys just get it out as far and wide as you possibly can.
Thank you.
I made a comment about my own representative, my own state representative, John George, on my Facebook page the other day, because we are fighting about him wanting to select Kyle Hilbert as Speaker of the House. And a whole group of us out here in his district don't want him to do that. We would prefer to have Tom Gann. And we're having a conversation about that where he's just, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm voting for Kyle Hilbert. And so I've actually pasted conversations that I've had, or one of them, on my Facebook page, where I've just opened it up to the public and said, here's what's going on. We've been polite too long, and I didn't call him names. I wasn't rude to him. I actually told him how much I appreciated him taking the calls, and talking to me back and forth via text. So I'm not saying be ugly, be rude, be mean, or call people names. Do not do that. You get no traction with that. Okay. But I'm tired of being polite. Usually in a polite society with legislators, it's all been like, well, go ask them. Would you make sure you're like super nice and you ask them, hey, could you do this for me? Well, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm sorry, but you're my representative, and you should be doing what I expect you to do. And if there are a whole bunch of other people who are standing behind me, then by God, it is your job to do. And I'm not going to ask you. I'm just going to tell you, hey, this is what we need you to do because you're my representative. And I'm also not going to not call you out, because it used to be, well, don't say that in public because then he won't help you anymore. I don't give a rat's butt anymore. I don't care. They're not helping you if you try to be nice and don't say anything about them. So what difference does it make? And by God, we got to do the same thing with these people. Is you got to quit protecting people. Just come right out and call these people names. You will notice that on this podcast, we don't have a problem calling people's names. I'm not going to say, well, that guy who did the so-and-so at the, no, people need to know who's doing this. Call these people out. Ugh. You
Right
have
on.
Dana who says they're supposed to work for us, not the people working for them. Damn straight, Dana. And we are going to have to do, if we want them to take that seriously, then we're going to have to start forcing that issue. Again, be nice, but be firm. Ugh.
Well said.
That's really, that's how the left has won so far, because they're just bullies. They talk louder. They speak up. They don't, they just keep going.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we don't have to be bullies back there, because
No.
I'm not going to get into the ditch with you and you're not going to pull me in with you. So I'm not going to bully people, but that doesn't mean I have to be quiet. That doesn't mean I have to sit down and put my hands in my lap and go, oh, okay. I'm not doing that anymore. If you're causing a problem and you're denying me my liberty, I will call you out by name every time. And if you don't like it, then maybe it's your clue to change.
Yeah.
So join me, everybody, on the podcast this morning. Please join me in this effort to call everybody out and make sure
Jenny,
people understand what they're doing.
Maybe, okay, so we're not going to put up your blood pressure or your pulse meter on the side of the screen, but maybe at the end of every show, we have a little rolling credit of all the people that we're going to continue to call out. Just we roll the end credits. Here's all our list. Here's our list of all our people we're going to call out, just constantly.
I don't think that's a bad idea, because there are a bunch of people who voted against Bullard for pro tem, and those are eventually all going to get called out, because I'm going to publish every name I can find on that. And we know Julie Daniels did, because she's gotten an appointment, and we know Lonnie Paxton did because he got an appointment. So I think that everybody who got an appointment, it should be safe to say, voted for voted for Paxton. Who was the one that he made? Oh, it was Chuck Hall. Sorry, Chuck Hall is who he made budget chairman. So, we've got to start calling these people out, because they voted for Lonnie Paxton. So I'm just saying, these are the people that we know who are authoritarians. I just say we start calling them out. We can put a nice little plaque, like we're giving them an award.
Yeah.
Like we're giving them an award. Put a nice little plaque underneath here that says authoritarian.
The Rope Authoritarian Award.
I think that's great.
RAA.
Maybe you
make a little logo. RAA. Give the Rope Authoritarian. Have a pic. We can have a little, little deal that one of your animations pops up, gives them a little star on their chest, their little RAA star.
And will you please have a Hall of Fame for that award?
Yeah.
Oh, so that's what we have to do.
On top of it.
Yes. And Ashley says yes, but God, for one, will not stop. Well, we're going to have to do that. I mean, if Ashley can do it, for Pete's sakes, the rest of us can do it. Ashley's got more skin in the game than the rest of us do.
She is.
Awards is the language they understand. And then if we did something like the link I posted, it might get us some national headlines. We'll have to work with Mike over here, because he's got some.
Jenny, we can.
Wait.
Look at this. We can literally do a live award show on the podcast, like once a month, and see who shows up to receive their award. And if they don't, we can even just spotlight them even a little bit more.
It is.
I vote for you, Michael. I vote that that's what we need to do. So when we get off of here, let's start making those awards.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the podcast, we can flash up our little animations with our plaque, authoritarian.
Yeah. Well, we can have a short on that. Everybody can send that out. Here's another recipient that didn't show up to receive their RAA, their authoritarian award.
You laugh, but satire is so needed. It is a source of so much truth. And the memes that could come from that, powerful.
Jenny
yeah.
knows I'm the meme master. She had to.
Well, you need to get on that, Michael. Then quit telling me that you are and get something done.
All right. There we
All
go.
right. So we had Amber Evans, my husband and I graduated from Oregon schools in 1984 to 1990. Our children attended the Salem Kaiser school system in the early 2000s. We pulled them out and homeschooled them. My sister-in-law is a former second grade teacher that ended up changing careers altogether because of the policies and agenda at the independent school district, which was no different from any other school district. So, I mean, it's not like this is not everywhere. I mean, but don't forget, the whole Marxist ideal is to make us just stupid so that these elitists can do whatever they want with us. And if you don't grasp that, I do not know. I'm pretty sure it's not going to help to drag you behind my car. I don't know that would jar. And I mean, at some point, you're just going to have to wake up and go, this is all a game. And you guys are pushing me into something. And you're going to wake up and say, I'm not going to do that anymore.
No, maybe our to-do takeaway from this is that if everyone can commit to contacting either email, whatever you do, social media, your state house rep and your state Senate rep, and tell them that we need in Oklahoma a pass the trash law like Texas did many years ago.
Yeah.
What
So
is
Mike just said, this should be our categories. This is great. We need to write these down. Child abuser of the year, money launderer of the year, conflict of the interest of the year, hiding stuff from parents, Vanguard Award, groomer of the year, secret trans teacher of the year.
Mike is hired. He's hired.
Exactly.
That's great.
Well,
we're going to have to get on that. I mean, what do you have going on for the rest of the day, Mike? We'll just get on this right now.
No, I got a lot of work to do, but I want to ask Mary, in that pass the trash bill in Texas, like, for example, I mean, and we talked about it earlier. I mean, is that like, does that have like a zero tolerance type of policy within it, or is there, other, I mean, how do they handle those situations? Do you know?
I'd have to go back and read. It's been a few months since I read it the first time, but the focus of it, from my perspective and memory, is accountability. So many times in these states, they are letting their own policy about how they handle things supersede the laws that already exist. So we shouldn't even have this problem. In Oklahoma, if you know that someone has sexually abused a child, you're mandated by law, our state law, every teacher that knows it, every principal, there should be 20 calls in saying to the Department of Human Services of reporting that. And you have a crime against a child, you should be reporting to law enforcement as well. But what they're finding is that they make policy in the district that funnels all that information to school administrators. And that's their policy. You give it to the school administrator. Yeah. So the accountability in Texas is passed the trash law, focuses on that building head administrator, the principal, and the district head administrator, the superintendent. And there are criminal penalties for failing to do so.
Well, and that's what we do in Oklahoma. We pass these laws all the time and they have absolutely zero teeth in them. So it was like the Common Core law. Well, you shouldn't, there's a law passed. You can't teach Common Core. Well, make me.
Well, you even look at the Open Records Act. I mean, literally, if they don't supply you with the record, there's really nothing that happens to them whatsoever. They can take as long as they want. They can take 20 years to get your record if they want to.
It's true. The only way you're getting it is by making a public ruckus, public pressure.
Yeah.
That's it.
And as you pointed out before, Mary, our AG has been huge. We want to get public records. We want to do this. Well, name one time when he's jumped into something like that and made some state agency regurgitate their closed public records for people that want to have them. And I do want to, because we're going to have to get off here in a minute, but I do want to point out, we suddenly had a huge increase in our audience, and they all came from X. Do you know who's on X?
Are you asking
All
me?
of our favorite public school educators are on X. So we must have gotten out that we're calling people by names. And now we have quite the X following people, because you can't track down who's watching it on X. It's not like if you're watching it on Facebook or something and you comment, I mean, you don't get to. So I'm pretty sure we should, be seeing some more pushback here pretty quick. But again, if we sit down, if we don't become Ashley Rowlands and we don't just come out wailing against these people, they're going to continue to bully us, because that's exactly who they are. They're bullies who go, well, we hate bullying, but you better not do it or we're going to get you. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's ludicrous. All right, last comment, and then we got to get off of here. Becky says, it's so wild how different this is handled in Texas, and she should know, she's from Texas, at least in the areas I've lived. If there's even a whisper of these issues, there's an office response starting and an investigation, and it's all over the news. Look at Perryton last year. So again, we're falling down when it comes to Texas. I mean,
accountability.
So many ways. So anything else, Michael?
No, that's it. I think we, I mean, it really is. I mean, thank God for Mary. I do want to say that. I mean, no one else is talking about this kind of stuff and making and connecting these dots that are just literally mind blowing. When you really look at how deep they go into all these different departments and law enforcement and where they are, you just wonder really, who's got what on who. And I know one of the comments was, the intimidation. What is really going on.
That's hope Becky. Don't forget the story she told about, if you speak out, you're gonna get fired, or I mean, that's what they do. They intimidate you, and that's what makes you shut up. If you talk about it, you're gonna lose your job. We're gonna fire you. We're gonna keep the pedophile who's raping girls, but we're going to get rid of you.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank God for you, Mary. Thank God.
Yeah. Those are kind words. Thank you. Thank you for, and I know they're listening. Thank you for the survivors out there. Those are the bravest people I've ever met. And I know they're out here listening. Appreciate you guys.
You guys get a real award, and it's an award from the bottom of our hearts, and it's an actual one that means something. So, Mike says Education Bully of the Year. I'm going to write all of these down before we get off so I can go back and get them. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for being on. Mary, any last words?
No. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for reading. Please go to visit.com and share the content, subscribe, and you'll get it in your email whenever a new article is posted. Appreciate all of you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody. You have a great day. Tomorrow, we will have Julianne Romanello talking about carbon tax credits, carbon credits. Please be here. We've got so much of this garbage going on in Oklahoma today. Wake up, be here, hear about carbon credits tomorrow with Julianne Romanello. We'll see you tomorrow, and thanks for being with us.